Well, today we're talking about coaching versus leading and servant leadership. And so, in your experience, I guess let's break down the definitions, right? So let's start with coaching versus leading.
Well, for me, the definitions of those two, those are going to be actually almost one thing. We can talk about the nuances. When I talk to most people, or I get brought in an executive coach or helping one of these family businesses or close to home businesses, how they view leadership is not leadership to me. It's management. And so I think that's one of the things we'll talk into about what's holding them back. For me, there's really only two styles of leadership. There's a style that'll go into servant leadership, which we can define, which is nuanced, but there's a style where I'm hiring you to accomplish a business purpose. And then my job after I hire you is to help you accomplish that as quickly as possible. And as for a long time. And then there's really the other side. And you can be the nicest person in the world, but it's called management. And it's often micromanaging, which at the underlying it is how most people view leadership is this threat, sometimes by a really nice person that is either do this the way I do what I say, the way I say it in the time frame I say, or you're fired. And at the end of the day, like that can get you really to go really fast with your business for a very short amount of time. But it's not a great way to continue growing things for a variety of reasons. One is like sometimes you'll, from that traditional leadership viewpoint, that authoritative leadership. So like maybe that's the difference, coaching versus authoritative leadership in my mind. That authoritative leadership means that, well, one, I only care about what you can do for me almost in this payroll period or this quarter, because like if you get into elder care, you have a kid that has special needs, or your spouse goes through cancer or something. Well, even if you've been the most productive person for the last 6 months, and when you get through this 6 months, you'll still be the most productive person I've ever hired. In that time period, the authoritative leader often will say, well, there's the door. It also requires that the authoritative leader is actually right about what they want done and how they want it done, and that there's not a better way. And I've been in so many businesses. We mentioned 60 plus acquisitions and capital raises. I know one thing that makes me never want to be an authoritative leader. And I know that I'm wrong about at least 3 things in my business today that I think I'm right about. And oh my God, like I'm not making decisions. I'm not asking my team to do things knowing that I'm wrong. I'm doing it knowing that I'm right. And if I'm an authoritative leader, there's not a culture that's giving them the flexibility that the coaching side would. And the coach says, look, I hire you to accomplish these business outcomes. And after that, my job is to help you be as successful in reaching those business outcomes as possible. And so at that point, that changes what I tell you, how I show you what we're trying to do, how I interact when you don't reach things. And so that's how I would define coaching versus really authoritative leadership.
So let's kind of talk then about the mistakes you see, business owners making when, they're trying to focus on their talent, where they can bring the biggest impact to their business. I think we've danced around it a lot, but what mistakes do you see business owners make when they kind of say, hey, I'm going to focus, I'm going to lead the sales team because that's what I'm good at. I know all the clients, I built up this business, and I need everyone else to do their job so I can focus on sales. That might not be the right example, but what mistakes do you see them making when they try to kind of pull themselves out of all the muck and focus on those 1 or 2 things that they think they want to do, or it's their passion, or they think is the biggest impact for their business?
Yeah. And again, I think it goes back to what I said earlier. I think it was Steve Jobs that says you hire smart people so they can tell you what to do, not so you can tell them what to do. Right.
Right.
I think it all goes back to self-determination theory for me. Like, you hire a person for what you can see. Like, you can only see what they put on their resume, the stories that they can tell about their history, and whatever you get from calling references or whatever. They've got a collective history of what they've accomplished. But you don't hire, like, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Effective Leaders. He's got a great quote in the beginning of his book. It says, you can hire a person's hands, but you can't hire their heart. You can hire a person's back, but you can't hire their mind. And I think the bigger a company gets, the more important it is to be hiring on values first. So you hire on values first, competence second. And you need to have that competence. Like you can't hire people that don't know how to do the job. But if you don't pay attention to that, to the values, which I think a lot of small business people are so desperate to get the talent, to get the work off their plate, that they forget, or they don't know. Maybe it's ignorance. Maybe it's just to be more expeditious and whatever you want to call it. But if you take your eye off that values ball, that's going to cost you way more in the long run than making making a bad values hire is going to cost you more than making a bad competence hire. Because a competence hire, you're going to see it pretty quickly if they're not competent, and you're going to make a decision whether they're trainable or not, and you get them off the plate. But the values piece, if they're competent, it can be a really long-term cancer that you brought into the company.
I always say when you start a business, you hire your brother, you hire your brother-in-law, you hire your neighbor, you hire your neighbor's friends, and everyone does whatever they need to do to get the business off and running, because that's how you start a business, right? 9 times, unless you're going through funding or venture cap or whatever it is. But usually it's someone has an idea, they bootstrap it, they hire their people they know to do it. Then the business gets too big and they haven't built the processes or the procedures in, because, well, why would you do that when we're just trying to do what we can? And then the business grows bigger than the experience, the process, the procedure. Those are the kind of two that jump to my mind. Is there any other experiences that you can kind of think of that you've seen where that cause people to kind of get that work-life balance out of whack?
Yeah, you nailed it. I describe those as the two plateaus that most people hit on the way to $1 million. One is going from being the person doing it all to letting go and hiring your first person or two for support. And a lot of people get stuck there. And then the second one is somewhere around 700,000-800,000 before you hit $1 million. The business is more and more complicated, but it's built on systems that were for a 6-figure business. So
yeah, I always say that, like, they're running a $10 million business on a $5 million process.
Exactly. And so it's complicated because the business is always evolving and it requires you as the owner to constantly evolve with it.
Right.
And unless you do that work, which is hard work, you got to read the books, you got to go to the groups, the masterminds, do the work. You get stuck and the business gets blocked by you. You become the bottleneck.
You're the constraint.
Where people, like you hit on it really well. Those are the two plateaus that I speak about as well. Why that happens for people is typically an inability to let go of control. That's a big challenge that a lot of people share with me is I don't trust other people to provide the service the way I can, or to answer the email the way I can, or to do the marketing the way I can. And that's valid because no one will ever care about your business as much as you as the owner. But as long as you're the only person who can do something, you're always going to be the only person who can do something. So that's where people get stuck as the marketer, salesperson, recruiter, admin, customer service, and they're buried. They're trying to do 8 different roles and they only have 10% of their time each week to give to each of those roles. That's where those plateaus hit.
Yeah.
And that's why when people recognize that they've hit a plateau and they make some strategic changes, like hiring a new manager, putting in a new system to free up their time, their growth can just take off like crazy. I often see businesses double without the owner working more because they finally let go and got out of their own way.
The skill development here of being of service is learning how to prioritize the important over the urgent, how to delegate effectively, and how to follow through. I think that's a big piece for me personally, and the Green Beret community, is men that say what they mean and mean what they say is another way of saying men that follow through on their commitments, right? Because if you say it and now you have to prove that you meant what you said. That means you have to carry out what you said. And that if you do that as a general principle, it will naturally create kind of this filter for yourself to go, do I really want to say yes right now? Because if I say yes, I'm going to do it. And it makes you take a look at your calendar and your priorities before you just agree to make somebody happy in the moment.
And I think that also leads to credibility, which leads to trust. And I think at the end of the day, I talk a lot. It's being a business owner is building a leadership team that you trust. Because without trust, you're the micromanager. You're working a million hours a week. If you don't trust people, what do you have, right? You have a bunch of individuals doing stuff. There's not a lot of loyalty. No one's going to go to the wall for you. No one's going to be selfless and say yes to your needs because they're going to be thinking, well, I got my own stuff to do.
Right. And then you lead by example, right? Everything you do, your team will do.
So that's point number 3, right? Don't do anything, or don't ask someone to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself.
That's right. That's right.
So walk us through that one in your world, through your lens. What does that look like?
Well, if it's dangerous, dirty, depressing, lots of D words, go through it. Understand what you're asking somebody to do. And that's a difficult thing to do with business too, right? Because I'm not the marketing guy. I'm not the technical guy. I have my stuff that I need to grow my skills in, but I need to at least dabble. I need to go through and understand what I'm asking somebody to do, because otherwise I may be asking you to do something that's 100 hours of work, and in my head, I think it's 10.
Right.
Now we've got a problem and a miscommunication. So, and the way that I find I can kind of accelerate my understanding of this is to go through some of this stuff with the team. And that can be just as simple as a weekly meeting, going through the project development so that I get a feel for the pain points and where the congestion is in the pipeline. Right. I can get a feel for who's outperforming who on the team, who is being of service and who is just out for themselves. And you have to ask those questions. If you're not going to actually do the keystrokes and have the conversations with your clients and prospects that your team is, then you have to talk to them and be probing with your team so you get a deeper understanding and recognize that you're an authority figure. You've got to lower the guard of the meeting, and it's got to be okay for them to tell the truth. As soon as you're that disciplinary parent within your business, nobody's going to tell you anything. You've got to be a coach.
We always like to start with the definition. So today we're talking about performance improvements, right? How to improve less and get better results. But let's talk about and define in your world, what are performance improvements? What do they apply to in your world?
Yeah. So, I mean, in general, performance is something you can measure, right? So that's an output or a result of your business. That could be things like, quality and customer retention or customer satisfaction. It could be things like on-time delivery, lead time, a turnaround time on a request. It could be your individual costs, could be other things like revenue or profit, right? So financial indicators. So performance is something that we can measure on what happens, but it's the what happens that I'm really interested in. So if we try to drive the car looking in the rearview mirror, like all of that stuff already happened. Last quarter's financials, over, can't change them. So we really need to be thinking more process-based. So that's why I'd be interested in saying, you didn't ask it, but so what's a process? So everyone does things in business every day. And if a process is just the series of actions you take to get that particular end or result, well, then it should be intuitive. If I want different results, I need to change the process. And that's really where my whole methodology comes in.
So that's great. Thank you for identifying that. In my world, you think about the process and inputs. And you said if you're getting the same result, you need to improve the process. But oftentimes a small business owner who has been head down working, right? No one starts a business and says, the first thing we need to do is create scalable process.
Yeah.
They all jump in and do whatever they have to do. And if they do a great job, they grow and they outgrow the processes they have created. And the only input they have at that point is more time, harder work. So when you're in a situation, and that's often the point where KeyHire starts working with the small business, is we're all working hard, we're missing family dinners, we can't get away for weekends because we have to be here and input our time. It's the only way we can sustain or maintain or grow. And that's the time where you need to break it and say, okay, now we need to think about change.
Yeah.
And is that kind of what you've experienced as well?
I mean, absolutely. And I think you've covered the whole conversation very well there. But it's interesting when you say you have to insert and break it. A lot of small, medium-sized businesses, like you mentioned, they're head down, doing what they've always done, reacting to the day, and they might not know. So in your example, you are aware of there's a problem. A lot of times, maybe even some of your listeners, they're kind of problem unaware. Like, I don't realize that me spending so much time making daily decisions is preventing me from scaling. You know, I'll give a simple example for me. Like, my group, I only have 3 employees, right? But I use a virtual assistant to offload some of that work so I have more time for business development and delivery. I can't offload any of that work without process. We're a small group. I'll bet some of your listeners have more than 3 employees. Like, I am still using process to improve and get better results.
There needs to be a callback or some recognition of, look, you've done a great job to get here. And whenever we bring experience in, we always have that conversation with that talent that's coming in saying, it's super important you understand they've done a great job to get where they are. And you can't just go in and say, what are you guys doing? This isn't how you run a business. And you kind of upset everyone. And, people always say, I love change. What they forget to say is, unless it involves me.
Yes.
You can change everyone else's job, but I'm really good. You don't need to touch what I do.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure in your work, you do a lot of work, in terms of not just the quantitative. Yes, I've come in and I've grown revenue, or I've grown EBITDA, or I've, saved 20% on the operating side of the business. But there's that EQ and that management capability, that mentoring. It's really hard to screen for, if you will. You have to have conversations. You have to really, check those references. And, a great hire is one that can come in and honor your culture while at the same time getting the rest of the team galvanized around what the future can look like, right? And they're hard to find because, like you said, some people come in and bull in China shop. I'm going to change everything tomorrow, and that doesn't go well usually.
I think it's a skill set in itself to understand what needs to be changed and to change things quickly, but also making people feel like you're bringing them alongside and they've had a say in that. And it really is a skill set. And the last thing I think, you didn't mention it, but you probably were going to, is the owners who there's no documentation, there's no delegation, right? When you're buying a business and the business is the owner, the value goes down really quickly, correct?
Yeah, systems and processes. And, as it relates, I'm sure you get involved with writing job descriptions, right? Because there is no documentation of the job description. The other thing that the founder will do is put on the lens of, here's the job today, and they can articulate the job today and maybe even craft a job description that's compelling but also accurate. But what about the job tomorrow, the next year, right? You want that to be aspirational, not only to attract the right candidates, but to say, this is the trajectory we're on, and these are the skill sets that we need, right? We don't need yesterday's where we were. We need tomorrow where we're going. So that's definitely a mistake we see.
One of the biggest mistakes they make is hiring for today's needs and not future needs, right? And that's a big part of what we do, is build capacity into those roles and make sure they understand why we're bringing people in. So that's a great word, building capacity, right? Building capacity in. I love that, because as it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, everybody's usually at the top of their game. That's why you hire them. But unless they've done more and they can bring that skill set back into your company, that's where you really get that multiplier effect. Correct. I'm a dog guy. He's a cat guy. I smell a problem. But anyway, let's bring Kevin on and get into this.
What's happening, my friend?
It's going good. It's going really good. How about you?
I'm living the dream. I love dogs. I love cats, so we can be together as one.
Cool.
It's this great and massive property that we inherited.
Super cool, man. Sounds like a great place to be.
It is a lot better thanks to Starlink. When I only had 10 megabyte DSL, it was a little hard to do business up there.
You can get your gig now? You have your gig? Hey, Sean, how you doing?
I'm doing well, sir.
Did I nail the intro?
It was great. Thank you for that.
Hans, how are you?
I'm doing well, Corey. Thanks for having me.
How's the soccer career?
The soccer career,
Yeah.
it came to a dead end many years ago.
Hard stop?
Hard stop. Yeah, really hard.
Breither, is that correct?
Yeah. I saw you double clutch there when you had to say it twice in a row. So.
Yeah, I know. It's you say it's 3 syllables, but it's really like 2.5.
Like my musical abilities are a mile wide and an inch deep.
See, I'm on the inch wide, inch deep scale. So we were at a dinner party like last year.
Yeah.
I said I have 2 jobs. I do my day job and then I have my Uber shift that night. And people leans over to my wife and they're like, "Is Corey really driving Uber?" And she's like, "No, this is."
Hi.
Did I get any of that right?
Yeah, it sounded good.
So we have a pickleball court in our yard, and my son plays AA hockey, travel hockey, and so that court gets used almost exclusively for him on rollerblades with hockey. Welcome to episode 26 of the KeyHire Small Business. Sorry, Matt, I got to do that again. It's Matt, I got to do it again. Do I have to do it all over again from the beginning? Let us handle one more time. Stop settling for the one more time. I hate job descriptions. Oh, we'll start again, Maddie. Take 2. I got all messed up. There you go, hon. We just talked about how I never mess up. And I missed the music, Matt, when we used to have the music.